Molly, you heard start. And we are now almost fully staffed for the first time in 3 years. That's more than my entire tenure here. So we are very excited and ready to really start moving and grooving, particularly on the finance end of things. So again, appreciate your patience. So we'll be talking about the preliminary budget tonight and the outlook to set the stage for your budget review and discussion process over the next few months. And you just kind of laid out some of the next big milestones for you. And again, just really thank you to Chris, who did work at times from home, and appreciate that, and Robin for all her help in pulling this together. Just a quick look at where we're at with some key dates and checkpoints. So, obviously we're here today doing our preliminary presentation. As you said, you just went over the departmental initial presentations. Your final review will be in the beginning of March. Open hearing has moved up this year to March 9th, which I think will be really helpful as we prepare for town meeting in the Blue Book, and then ultimately we'll be ready one way or another for town meeting on May 4th. So, just before we get started, it's important, and we talked about this last year, budgets are really a reflection of the community, what it values and holds important. They're more than just dollars and cents on a spreadsheet, although that's really important. They're really value statements. So for us, when we look and come to you and for your recommendations, we're looking at preserving what we consider really excellent town services, supporting and retaining excellent employees, maintaining our very high quality schools, and obviously really striving to limit our tax growth and living within Proposition 2.5. That being said, we're doing that under some pretty significant squeeze. So, obviously we have rising personnel costs, both salary and health insurance, rising in cost of services, our capital needs, and then the uncertainty of grants. Again, all trying to stay within the 2.5. So we'll start with revenue. So again, revenue assumes a 2.5%, includes new growth, and to maintain our existing excess levy capacity, which I just lost that other screen, but I think it's about 2.8 million is what we're estimating. New growth, as you'll see here, is very conservative at 100,000. We have the last couple years on here, and even prior, it's always come in higher than that. So I think we'll talk a little bit later about some potential budget levers, and this is certainly one that we could discuss with the Board of Assessors, and specifically considering revising this number to be a little more reflective of what we anticipate seeing. State aid is set in late January, early February. The governor will be speaking tomorrow, and we hope to get some more information on what that looks like. Again, that's relatively a small portion of our budget, but nevertheless an important number. Local receipts, we generally look to average those over the last 5 years. Local receipts include, big ones are the motor vehicle excise tax, permit and license fees. And, 5-year versus a 3-year average, we tend to go with the more conservative 5-year. That's typically been the practice in Dover. And you will see some use of free cash here in our first preliminary budget. That includes the Board of Selectmen commitment to use some monies to offset the community center debt. It includes, I believe it is our first year of payment for the turf field debt. We have some potential unpaid bills, and then some special articles, I think to the tune of about right now almost $1.3 million. So that includes our contribution to the Dover-Sherborne Region OPEB fund, general stabilization contribution. And then we have 2 one-time funding requests on the town meeting warrant. One is a climate action plan from the Sustainability Committee, and the other is for a master plan, $200,000 from the Planning Board. It also includes money, as we do each year, to reduce the tax rate. I will note, and we'll talk about it later, this version 1 of the budget doesn't include, or currently does not include, any free cash for capital. and we will discuss that as we go along a little bit. So now into expenses. You'll see, we'll go into some detail in some of the operating budget requests, but you'll see here, per your request, there was a goal to stay within 2.5% for operating budgets. We'll talk about why some departments don't reflect that currently on the next couple slides. And it is important to note that new personnel asks have not included in the numbers you're seeing tonight. So we did try to keep those separate. Not all departments did that when they submitted their budgets, but Chris and I worked to back out those numbers so that you can look at them independently and what they might do to the budget. And again, I'll go over those. You'll notice an asterisk here for the region. And I know, Don, you just said Don's going to be coming, I think, the 23rd, and she'll do a much better job than I can do. And if you have questions, I know Robin could certainly help me. But the out-of-district funding has been moved from the Chickering Dover school budget to the region funded net of the circuit breaker. And that has to do with some accounting by the state and a request that they change how they do things. We previously, Dover, I think is very unique. I'm not aware of any other communities that fully funded out of district costs. And now basically they've asked we treat it like a typical, most communities do, which is it's in the region budget and it's net of the circuit breaker.
So Chris had his hand up, Mike.
Oh, sorry, I can't see anybody.
False alarm. Disregard.
Oh, it was a false alarm.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thanks. If you see any hands, I can't see the screen, the radio bunch screen. So as I mentioned, we'll go through some of the asks. So the ones in asterisks are included in the budget right now. The ones that are not asterisks do not. So the first is a very large amount currently in the Board of Selectmen budget. And that is, we're calling it a salary adjustment account or set aside. So we have pending negotiations both with our police union and our DPW union. Those are not settled yet. We are hopeful they'll be settled prior to town meeting, but we needed to account for the potential funding of those new contracts for this upcoming fiscal year. And so we thought it was appropriate to segregate those into this salary adjustment account. When those contracts settle, that appropriate amount will be moved from that account into the appropriate departments. For police, it's easy; it's all one account. For our what we usually call a DPW union, covers DPW building maintenance here at the townhouse, some park and rec staff, and as well. So that'll be spread out amongst those departments. The personnel board is also undergoing what they call a comp and classification study, compensation and classification study. That's done every 3 to 5 years to look at how our compensation for our positions aligns with comparable communities. So as I think you know, we've had some difficulty recruiting. And when we are successful, we've needed to bring employees in at top step or even above. And that's difficult. One, it's not just an ideal best practice for personnel. You want to bring people in, they have room to grow and move up our steps, as opposed to just getting the COLA each year. And it doesn't work great for recruiting. We have a town engineer position that is currently vacant that we have been unable to recruit even at top step. We've had some very good candidates, but they, at the end, when we get to the salary piece of the puzzle, they unfortunately declined the position. So I do think this is a really important project. And I think that, it's really going to help us both retain our employees and continue to recruit high quality employees. But again, that's not completed yet. It will be completed before town meeting. What we will look at is a couple things, what that number looks like, and if we can do it all in 1 year. If it's a real big number, we may have to consider, could we kind of step it over a couple of years to spread out that cost? But that'll be before the personnel board and then before the Board of Selectmen in the coming month or month and a half or so. So again, that's you'll see that large increase, that is kind of a temporary holding place. And again, particularly that amount for the class and comp would be spread evenly, or not evenly, but through all departments. So there won't be such an increase. The Board of Selectmen is not adding, 6 positions, which kind of looks like right now. Also in the public works expense budget, there's some increases that are required for compliance with some federal regulations. In order to comply with they call it the NIFTs with MS4, it's a stormwater federal requirement. We need some additional funding there, as well as to maintain our fleet and continue to meet the EPA emission standards. There's some additional funding there as well. One thing that is not in the budget yet, because we don't know what will come out of it, but I just wanted to note it here so it wasn't a surprise if something did come forward later, which is, you may recall the last couple of years, or was it 2 or 3, we had a citizen petition for a sidewalk near the Chickering School. At the last town meeting, the selectmen offered and came to a compromise that they would put together at the time it was called a sidewalk committee. It's evolved into a pedestrian safety committee. And that committee is meeting. It's led by Cam Hudson on the selectmen. And there could be some funding, short-term, $10,000, $15,000 funding that comes out of that may go into this budget for some immediate solutions to some safety, particularly in the Chickering area. So again, there's nothing in this budget now, but I just want to call it to your attention. Also in the budget, the Conservation Commission included $32,000 in additional consulting services. We do not have a conservation agent, we have a consultant, and we'll talk about that potentially as a budget lever later. But they have, as I think they've come to you, I think the last 2 years for reserve fund transfers because they have exceeded their budget. This dollar amount does not match what they spent last year, so they may still need more, but it brings it closer, I think, to reality in what they've been experiencing over the last 3 years. And again, these are not in the budget, but when you meet with the departments, I just want to bring these to your attention now. So the police have asked for 2 new positions. One is an executive assistant position. I don't know if the warrant committee is aware, but it is rare that our police department does not have a civilian staff person, for clerical duties, payrolls, dealing with residents that call for non-emergency issues. That duty has been handled by what we call an administrative sergeant. So it's a full-time sergeant position that spends a lot or most of their time in the office. And the chief has identified that's really not the best use of a sergeant's time and frankly, the money that would pay a sergeant. In addition, I think the warrant committee knows the selectmen are pursuing regionalizing dispatch operations. It was delayed a year, but we are back in the process, and that could occur as soon as the end of this calendar year. If that were to happen, we'd no longer have a police officer sitting at that desk. There would be another position on the road, and the chief feels it would be important to have a person, in this case a civilian, there during business hours to greet customers, answer the phones, and things of that nature. So again, it's not in the budget now, but that is a side ask. In addition, this is a tough one for me to word. He's looking to create an additional sergeant position, which would allow him to create a lieutenant position. So right now there is no second in command for the police department. I don't think it's appropriate for a town of our size to have like a deputy chief position, but having a lieutenant would be more than appropriate for a town of our size. Would provide the chief with some real, kind of right-hand experience and help, as well as a position that could focus on accreditation, which is a standard that many communities are pursuing, but it is almost a full-time job while you're going through the process, and it's just not feasible with the current structure. So that ask is there. And there's also an ask in their expenses for technology to transition to a cloud-based server, as well as obtain some field training software. And again, the chief can talk more about that when he meets with you. The assessors have a side ask for a new part-time position. It'd be about $32,000. And then that would also result in some office changes, so that they estimated about $15,000 in expenses that would be associated one time with that new employee. The Council on Aging has asked for additional hours for two of their existing positions. One's a little confusing, so again, Janet will do a much better job than I, but the administrative assistant, they're looking for 4 additional hours, so over what they're working now. But they're also looking to transfer 5 of her current hours that are paid out of a grant into the operating budget. So, on paper, it results in 9 hours impact to the operating budget, but it's really 4 additional hours of work. And also the same for the not the same, but just 4 additional hours for the program coordinator. That's not currently paid out of the grant at all. Janet and Bob Cox, the COA chair, can talk more about this, but when I met with them, they really stressed that yes, this is an additional ask, but they really feel that without this, they will have to reduce their services because their workload is increased. Their number of customers and people needing assistance and outreach has gone up. So they really feel this is necessary just to maintain their level services. And kind of a good news, bad news, more and more people are visiting the community center and learning about what they do, which is wonderful, but then that's a draw on services. So that's that request. And then there's very significant request in the ambulance budget for $114,000. And that's all in salary for additional EMT staffing and on-call pay. So I don't think it's a surprise to the Warrant Committee that the fire department and ambulance have had a very hard time staffing. Chief Smith, our first full-time fire chief, has been doing an excellent job hiring additional EMTs. He's been creative where he is hiring EMTs that do not live in town and has worked on the kind of the common area and the common space there so that they can be in town, have a place to stay while they're on call as opposed to being at homes in Dover, and has found a much better response as a result. I don't have the figures in front of me, and she can share them, but their response has just been out of sight compared to what it used to be. And so they're looking to continue that and grow that. So that's an additional request that's being asked. And then again, lastly, this is not in the budget, but wanted to bring your attention. We have every town in Massachusetts is required to have a veterans agent. It is someone who is a resource to veterans that live in our community, that acts as an advocate for veterans in terms of connecting them with financial benefits or other benefits, health benefits that they're entitled to. Dover, for many years, has had essentially a kind of side agreement with the full-time veterans agent in Natick, and we pay him $1,000 stipend a year to provide that service to Dover. For a variety of reasons I won't get into tonight, we think it's appropriate to look at doing something different than that arrangement. So I have reached out to other communities that have a shared veterans agent. They have what they call a veterans district. So there are communities that, again, every community doesn't need a full-time agent. Certainly Dover does not, but they pool their resources to have one agent serve those communities. And the agent usually, in one example, every day they're in a different town. They have office hours 1 day a week in every town, and that way the services are spread out equally. If we are able to pursue that and able to do that, we will not be paying $1,000 a year anymore. So we don't know what that would be. And obviously that'll be a consideration of if we can do it or not. But I do think it's the right thing to do. And so we are pursuing that. And that will be, potential adjustment that we may request of you should that come to fruition. Two things I just wanted to note, I don't have it on the slide, but one is there was actually a reduction in the Board of Health budget this year. The Board of Health has 2 part-time positions. Both are benefit eligible already. And the Board of Health has proposed combining them into 1 full-time position. I have been an advocate for that in that, as you know, I believe it's been very successful. We moved to a 4-day work week and stay open late on Tuesdays. And with our part-time offices, they're closed Tuesday nights and other times. And it'd be really great to have a full-time person, admin of that office, to provide that consistency. Because oftentimes when someone comes in, they're visiting multiple land use departments. So they're going to building, they're going to planning, and then we hit a wall when they go to Board of Health and they're closed. And we'll talk again about the conservation office. That's also an issue there as well, because they have a contractor and then a part-time staff. So I thought that was ultimately good news, as it's a reduction. And then one thing that's missing this year, as you've seen the last couple of years, is DPW has requested additional money in paving in order to reach the level we need to reach. It was a $50,000 ask the last couple of years. I know we funded only 25K one year. But we've received some additional funding from the state, and so that request is not in this year. Kevin feels that we are at a solid spot with that additional Chapter 90 supplemental funding, and there was no need to ask for that additional money. So that is not in the budget this year. So that is operating. I'll talk a bit about capital, but obviously, the capital budget committee is their process is underway, and they'll obviously present to you. But it is a big number. It's a 5.6 essentially ask this year. Of that, the largest is the fuel island at 1.7 million. And I just want to note, and we'll talk about some of the budget levers, but a big one for capital is grants. And particularly our DPW, Kevin's been very successful in bringing in millions with an S dollars in grants. And he is pursuing, particularly this year, $450,000 of culvert replacement that is currently in this ask, but we're hoping will be successful and could be backed out. And there's also a $600,000 intersection improvement request. I don't want to jump the selectmen, but I would urge the warrant committee, if they're interested, and we can certainly come here to you as well. On February 5th, we'll have a presentation on intersection improvements at Center Street, and our only lit intersection. Kevin obtained a grant to design intersection improvements to improve traffic flow, pedestrian safety. He also, as part of that, obtained a grant of up to $500,000 to construct the improvements. And Kevin advocated, and we actually got that number up to $1 million. So this ask of 600 was put in when we were only getting the 500,000. So that this ask will come down. It will not come down to zero in that, what the selectmen will be considering, or part of what they'll be considering on the 5th, is the state pays for, for example, traditional, I don't mean to be fresh, but kind of ugly steel silver poles. Many communities choose to go with kind of an ornamental, it's usually like a black, nice looking poles, things like that. The state won't pay for those. So we would have to pick up the difference in the cost between the kind of steel and then the ornamental pole. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, if the selectmen will support that, if that's something they want to pursue. But at the end of the day, that $600,000 ask will be reduced. We're just not sure how much yet. So this is an overall summary. So just the previous two slides you saw showing the expenses and the revenues. And then again, here it shows what we're calling a deficit, but I want to be clear. As I mentioned earlier, this preliminary budget does not use any free cash for capital. So, I would argue it's not a true deficit as it is related to capital. And we need to look at that. Version 2.0 of this budget will include a proposal in terms of use of capital. How much we can use, and then also how we pay for that capital, sort of what sort of debt service we look at. Our capital policy as it stands is that we borrow for projects over $1 million. And this year, that's only applicable to the fuel island. We then use 1.5% of the prior year tax levy to fund capital in our operating budget. And then all the remaining capital that gets approved and goes forward is funded with free cash. So, if we take out the fuel island, because we borrow that, we're left with 3.8, if my math is right, million of capital remaining that we need to deal with. So we
Right,
talked, sorry.
and Mike, I think it's important also to recognize that what we're we're still pulling together are a couple of important items. We hope Chris is pulling together a summary of all of our reserve funds, and we hope to get an estimate of free cash in the next few weeks, so that in the next week or so. So that will be really helpful. We'll also project, the various ways in which we can pay for capital, but if we do get those grants, we're looking at this deficit number, or the not really a deficit number, but the amount that we have to figure out how to fund as will most likely come down by around $600,000 or $700,000 just with the grants. And then we have to look really hard at all of the capital requests. Right now, I think all of them are labeled a priority, but given the pressure on the town finances, we may have to wait to replace some of the things that are being asked for. But, we will have an opportunity to look at that in detail and work with capital. But from our side, what we will be able to provide everybody with is, an understanding of, if we do debt, it will be excluded most likely, and then is just an incremental cost on people's tax bills. So we will have a number available, based upon the median household, so that we could take a look at that. I think what's really important is in this first pass of the budget, we maintained the excess levy limit at 2.8 million. Because if you are around there, if you start increasing the levy limit, that also has an impact on tax bills. Because and that would be a permanent impact, whereas excluded debt is for the life of the debt. I do know that the school, I think Dawn's doing her 2.0 budget, and I believe that came down a little bit. And we'll be looking at ours to find ways to find savings as well. But, given there's quite a bit of stuff that's not in the budget right now, so I think it will be a wash. I'm not quite sure, Chris, when we expect to get the final number on healthcare, but we're hearing rumors that it will be less than a 15% increase.
Correct. And yeah, that's something that we're going to work with HR, definitely for the next version that we provide is one showing some logic for how the projection is calculated, and also applying, a more realistic number based on what we know now, than what we're carrying in the budget. So what is in there now, we do expect to go down.
Right. But again, just to get expectations aligned,
Mhm.
it would be a lot for it to come down by 100,000. So we're not talking, huge amounts. We're not expecting huge amounts right now. So, um,
Rob, I'm going to head start on,
okay.
which is
Sorry,
perfect.
Mike.
No, don't be sorry. This is perfect on our budget levers. I think some of what we talked about is on both of these slides, the next two. So, in terms of what's next, right? So obviously we'll continue on our end to vet operating budgets, and you'll be doing that through your departmental presentations, and particularly evaluating those requests that are not in the budget, that were outside of the 2.5, and whether or not, some of those, all of those, none of those are appropriate to incorporate into the budget. As Rob and Christian talked about with fixed costs, we expect Well, health insurance, I never thought I'd be happy if health insurance went to 15 or to 12%, but in this case, we're hopeful, as well as our other insurance costs. We're hopeful that those will see a reduction as those are finalized in the next month or so. Capital will continue to affect the capital projects. I think it is worthy of a conversation with the Board of Assessors to consider looking at the new growth estimate. Robin mentioned the unused levy capacity. I think it's a priority to maintain that, but just the reality is that is an option. It's a lever should it be needed. We'll look at the free cash, and version 2.0 will include an appropriate use, particularly for capital. And I cannot click. There we go. As we mentioned, we have a new town accountant, and one of the projects I think Chris is going to work with Molly on is looking at our available balances per prior capital projects, that are completed, but maybe not all the funding was used, and that's a source of funds that we could use. As Robin mentioned, the borrowing, and right now, we do our policy calls for only borrowing projects over $1 million. Is that appropriate? There's been discussions of bundling smaller projects, things like that. So again, just things to think about, excluding debt and some certain debts. We talked a little about the Conservation Commission and whether or not it's appropriate to have a conversation about, is it a time to look at a full-time employee versus a contractor? I think our quick analysis shows that it would, even with benefits, there would be a savings over what the last 3 years have seen for the cost, of the contracting agent. And then you also get a benefit of having someone full time, and then so there's more hours for less money, and then also they're in the office so for customer service as well. So I think that's a worthy conversation. We do make our contribution to the DS Region OPEB fund. And again, looking at the pace of that, is it appropriate to consider ever scaling that back in a given year? So keep evaluating that. And then lastly, we've talked about grants. We're always looking. Our departments are very good. Our DPW has been excellent. So continuing to look at all opportunities to work to help alleviate some of the burden on taxpayers. And then lastly, I think I obviously defer to the Warrant Committee, but Woody sat on a small working group last year with I think it was feels like a million years ago. I think it was Robin and Woody and Chris, myself, and I forget who else was on it, but just to kind of work behind the scenes in between meetings, so that we're all kind of on the same page. So I think that worked really well, and we just recommend we consider looking at that again as we look to finalize and tweak the budget, and get to a balanced budget, and a successful budget at town meeting. And that is all I had tonight.
Questions?
Just to clarify, does the school number for school and regional include a placeholder for the union contract negotiation, or is there still a?
Oh, there's a placeholder in there
So there is a placeholder in that number.
for year one of the contract, because year one of the contract will be fiscal year 27.
Okay.
Michael, what was the projected deficit?
So we're right now we're
3.5 million.
3.5, yeah.
But I'm sorry, what was it?
3.5 million.
3.5? Okay, thanks.
But it includes capital requests of 5.9 million.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
So just to note, the Park and Rec presented to capital budget this weekend. I think on your slide, they're down for 1.2 million or something in requests, but they are more likely to be around 400,000. They're going to defer some of the other projects.
Okay.
So
No, I mean all of that really helps. And then, we're pretty confident that Kevin will get the grants, but we don't want to reduce the ask by the approximate 700,000 right now. So we have the culverts in at gross as well as the traffic study or the intersection study. So that's at 600,000 and then the culverts are at 450,000.
So is the way to think about it is yes, the full capital number is in the presentation, but none of the extra asks are in it. And so we might get a little bit of benefit on the capital situation from smaller parks and rec, the grants and everything else like that. Then the question is going to be coming of, well, then does that end up getting partially used in some way, shape, or form by the extra asks? And then how do you handle the plug
Right.
to plug the
Right.
deficit that's still going to exist?
Right. So Gavin, the way I would look at it is two buckets, like
Okay.
the capital on its own, but it does come out of taxpayers' money. So we have 5.9 in capital based upon our policy, 1.7 million we will issue debt for. So there will be additional debt service related to that 1.7 million, and that leaves the 3.5 million. And we haven't identified a source of cash for that. Then we have the operating budget and the special warrant articles that have a cash ask associated with them, and those are the
Um,
the
Master,
planning board's 200,000 for the master plan. The last time that was done was 10 years ago. We believe we can get that number down, but because they believe the proposal was much more than what we were looking for. There is also the climate action plan, and I don't know how much they're asking for that, Mike. I
I
can't.
believe it's currently, as you said, it's a gross has a 60K, but they're pursuing grants,
Right, right,
some matching grants, so that could be even cut in half potentially.
right. We also have been contributing $700,000 to the regional OPEB fund. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, last year it was
Right.
790 in total.
Right. So the region, so OPEB is basically unfunded retiree health benefits, and we have OPEB on the town side as well as the region side. The town has always been very proactive in funding that liability. And right now we are somewhere around 60% funded. So we pay as you go, which is about 300,000, and then we pay an additional 300,000. So the town has done a really good job. The region, last I looked, and I can get updated numbers, had an OPEB liability of $17 million, and this was about 5 years ago. That is split between Dover and Sherborne, and the region was not trying to fund that over and above what the pay and you go requirements were. So we decided that as a town, this was our liability, and we should treat it similarly to the way we're treating the town liability. So we got the actuary, so we worked with the actuary to understand what additional contributions we would need to make, but we wanted to make absolutely certain that any contributions we made would not go to the benefit of Sherborne. So the way we were able to do that was to set up an OPEB trust fund for the region on Dover's books. And, we would use that as a source of funding. And we have been contributing, I think, over the last 3 or 4 years, approximately $700,000 a year to try and reduce that unfunded liability. We need to get an updated actuarial report, which we don't have right now. We have been funding that out of excess free cash, And that right now is in our budget. That is a discretionary item. And we can make a decision that maybe, given the pressures that are on us, with all this other capital, maybe 700,000 is just not the right amount right now, and we want to reduce it. But that is currently in the budget, and that is a lever that we could pull. And then we have just the regular operating expenses. And my guess is at the end of the day, those will come down a little bit, even with the items that aren't in there. I think there's some estimates that are on the high side.
Robin, can I just ask a question on the money that's set aside for the OPEB liability? It sounds like it's not in any kind of restricted trust. You
It
have
is.
the discretion.
It's in a trust fund. It's restricted. It can only be used for OPEB.
Oh, so
It's a reserve account that we set up.
okay. I thought I heard you say there's a potential, so it's just future contributions that you wouldn't put in, not existing.
Right. So we would
Right.
just pay instead of paying out of our budget, if that trust fund were robust and we were at a very good funding level, we would just use those funds. And we wouldn't tap in additional town resources.
Okay, so you would just basically redirect the planned funding.
Right. Because that's what the intent is. But right now, we're building it. Ultimately, our goal is to do the exact same for capital, to basically be contributing to the capital reserve fund
Yeah.
and using the money from that fund to pay for capital.
Yeah, as I understand it, the Collins report will basically give you some guidance in terms of what those annual amounts should be.
But right, but right now we are so up against the wall with replacements. I mean, this $5.9 million number is staggering.
Yeah. So you'll decide what you can afford to do, but you'll have some guidance in terms of what the scale.
Right. And I mean, Chris and Mike and I have had a number of conversations, and we really, with the help of the Collins Center, we think where we might end up is coming up with a number for capital that will be high, but that the town can afford. And it's going to require that we spread the capital out longer than the desire of town departments is right now. But I mean, there's just so much money that we have available. And, I would say we are now, to use your analogy, our finances are flashing orange or yellow. We really need to proceed with caution. So we need to not only think about what the needs are today, but what the impact of how we fund those will be on the future of Dover. Because Sherborne right now has almost a $900,000 deficit, and their deficit, they don't have levy capacity for that 900,000. So they are faced with the decision to cut costs by approximately 900,000 or to do a Prop 2.5 override. And I don't want us to ever be in that position. So it's just going to be a couple of really tough years. And I mean, I understand it's a priority, for departments, but we really need to think about, is it truly a priority do you really need 3 trucks replaced this year? Can we maybe replace 1 this year, 1 the next year, and 1 the year after?
I'll put a bucket under the leak in the roof until we can afford to fix it the following year.
Right, but not be foolish. It's a balancing act. And so the Collins Center ultimate report is going to be extremely helpful to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's going to give you a basis for a whole new direction to have capital replacement reserves, basically, that you never had.
Right. But as Chris and I talked, the challenge is we deferred capital replacements for so many years. And these are not frivolous requests.
Yeah.
There are just so many of them coming all at once.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we never want this to happen again.
Right.
So how do we continue, so we have to fund capital and build our reserve as well.
Yeah.
So it's
You're acknowledging there's something called depreciation and it has to be funded at some point, right?
right,
Not just wake up and say, oh, I never knew we had a building that wore out or something.
right. No. So, we recognize the problem. We recognize we have to proceed with caution on how we're going to fix it. And we're just going to need to be patient over the next few years. And the other issue we have is that costs are increasing by more than 2.5%. So, our tax base is going up 2.5%, and we're not the only town that's facing this issue. Our neighbors in Medfield have a huge issue this year. So they're facing a 2.5 override or dramatically reducing services to come in at the 2.5%.
Can I ask something?
You certainly may.
Um, I know I'm typically a slow guy, but I sit here and listen, and I still don't have an understanding of what's going on. And I don't know if I'm the only person that's confused, but it always seems to me like we put up the spreadsheet, and then there's just like a whole bunch of other kind of tribal knowledge that comes out that impacts everything, but I just can't follow along. But just at the very simplest understanding, I mean, Michael, if you can put back up the projected revenues, just so I understand this, because I think what I'm taking away from this is that we have projected revenues of X and we have a whole bunch of budget requests of Y, but Y is $3.5 million more than X. Is that basically what we're
That's
saying?
it. That's it.
Okay, so then we just have to decide, like, either we're not going to spend that money or we have to find more revenues, and if we find more revenues, that's raising taxes.
Correct.
That's the whole nut of this.
So you're not a slow guy, you got it.
Okay, I got it.
And I mean, and we have buckets, we have different buckets, and within the expenses, there are also requests that are discretionary that we maybe don't want to fund this year.
Right. Okay. So when do we start horse trading and just saying no?
Now we're starting now. I
Oh,
mean,
that's what we're doing right now.
yeah,
Okay.
I
All
mean,
right.
we're going to identify the big thing is free cash. How much free cash do we have, and how much of that free cash are we comfortable using? Because we need to set aside certain amounts to maintain it, to maintain our credit ratings. So the next time we present in a week or so, we will have all the reserves mapped out for you. And we will, and that's what we're going to start to do. This is the first pass of the budget. There are just high estimates in there. So, and for instance, even the revenue side of things, we'll have a better idea. We estimated the revenue on a very conservative basis. We need to go back to the assessors and have a conversation with them, because $100,000 of new growth is just a joke. So, and so we need to look at both sides of the equation and get more realistic estimates. So the horse trading, to use your term, has begun right now. We have to,
Okay.
capital budgets, I don't know, are they coming to present, Woody?
They've started, yeah.
Okay. So,
Kevin and Mark have both presented.
but the Warren Committee has the schedule for what the 5.9 million ask is?
Well, only because Misha and I sit on the capital
Okay.
budget committee.
So, I
But
mean,
my understanding is that it's not that they're not actually going to be 5.9 million in requests,
okay.
given the fact that Park and Rec is obviously DPW is the bulk of the request this year, but Park and Rec is second, and Park and Rec is going to cut theirs to a third of what they originally budgeted. So that should help.
Yeah, so that's good. And we're also expecting to get the grants.
Yeah,
So then the horse trading is going to begin on the other stuff.
yeah, yeah. I,
I mean, what we can do to help you is we do have this budget summary in a spreadsheet form that we can put in your drive,
yeah,
and we can also give you the preliminary Article 4 if you don't already have it, so you can see all the detail on the operating budgets.
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
So I had a couple of other questions that may be relatively straightforward. What is our current debt service now, and what is our capacity for debt service as we're starting to think about funding
So
additional?
Joanne is pulling that together for us. You know, our capacity is much larger than what the town is comfortable with, but Joanne is pulling together, what our debt is now and what the debt service is.
Okay,
And then she will do some projections on, you know, what what would we be looking at for increased debt service for 1 million, 2 million, 2.5 million, and then what is that impact on the average homeowner, so we get a sense of how that might impact tax bills.
yeah.
Robin, how much does the AAA rating bear on the debt capacity? And is there is that a sort of a baseline? You don't want to give that up, and therefore you look at what they say you
So,
can afford.
right, so I asked Moody's once, and they came back with this crazy number. Like they said Dover could have like 200 million in debt, and I was like, I don't think so. Um, but
So it's not a constraint. Sounds like.
Right.
right, but it isn't from a
Heads would explode with that though, Robin.
Yeah.
Right.
right, right. And we could ask the question again. The issue is, there are a lot of people in town that are very wealthy, but then there are also a lot of people in town that are on fixed incomes. And we need, we've always prided, is that right? Prided ourselves on being fiscally conservative and responsible. And we need to continue to do that. And as a selectman, I certainly, and I believe Cam and Dave feel the same way, am committed to trying to to not have spikes in our tax rate, because I think if you're on a fixed income, that is very difficult to absorb. So, we want to try and keep that tax rate increase at an even keel as best as we can. So, we're trying to balance everything. And hopefully we can be successful. But it's right now it's just a challenge. And the last thing in the world, I would want for the town. If we were in the same situation as Sherborne is, I would feel personally responsible for leading the town down this path. I mean, it's just a horrible position that they're in right now.
I wonder if the Collins Center has provided any kind of context of Dover's situation of not really having a plan, a future plan in terms of needs for capital funding versus other towns? And therefore, is that an extenuating circumstance that would require or justify trying to use debt as one of the tools to try to catch up and,
Right.
and then go on another path?
I mean, Marty, we have no choice but to use debt to catch up. I mean, we just can't pay for
Yeah.
all the capital. It's just what I'm trying to do is I shouldn't say what we're trying to do is just smooth out that impact of the increase in debt service.
Mhm.
And
You
sorry
know,
if I just could add quickly in
yeah,
regards to the debt
definitely.
service. So Joanne will definitely be the primary source for this, but according to my records within levy debt service, based on everything we've done up until this point, for FY 2026 is $565,000 within levy. And then we have the debt exclusions, mainly related to the community center, which brings the total debt service for 26 to just under 2.6 million. But obviously the in levy debt is what we're trying to get a good grip on, as that's something that will stick around for years and years. So it's just that's what we're trying to do in terms of being prudent about future borrowing.
Michael, could I go back to the schools for a second? Uh, you said that the state is mandating a change in the way we handle circuit breaker funds, and that as I've understood things, we have not booked circuit breaker funds as revenue until it is actualized, which is usually in the next year, and then comes in and has been treated as free cash. So,
So
so a significant amount of free cash each year is actually due to the way we have managed our circuit breaker funds. Is the state saying that we can't do that any longer? And if so, what's the implication for our accumulation of free cash in the future?
So the state isn't saying that. So under the state rules, circuit breaker is maintained in a separate account. The state allows you to keep up to 1 year of circuit breaker funds in that account. What most towns do is they, rather than budget 100% of the out of district costs, they they net those costs based upon the prior year's circuit breaker funds or
Okay.
something like that. Um, so the state came in and there were and every year they audit grants and circuit breaker, or it's just part of the audit. So they came in and they said the region or the school district could become ineligible for grants because of the way we are accounting for circuit breaker funds. So we were accounting for circuit breaker funds all at the local level. So kids from age 3 to 22 were being accounted for at the local level.
Right.
So, and it makes it very difficult for the Commonwealth to audit and make sure that we're doing things right so that they can sign off on the grants. Because it was extremely cumbersome because the region was actually paying for students that were in the region, and then Dover would have to write checks to it was just money moving around, which was really complicated to track. So they basically said we need to start accounting for kids that are in the region at the region. So what Dawn did, and you see that in her budget presentations, she took the out of district payments that of expenses that used to be at Chickering and moved them to the region. And
Right.
there's a larger amount there. So you see this huge savings in at Chickering offset by the region, by an increase in the region. And then they also said we need to start netting those costs. So she then estimated what the net costs were. So in theory, we've been doing the same thing. We've been funding the budget whole and then using free cash, or the equal to the amount of the circuit breaker that came back to net it. So in effect, we were netting that expense. But now we're still going to have the net expense. So we're not grossing up our expense. So, but we're just not going to get a large amount of free cash back from the schools. So the costs are still the same. Net, we're in the same place.
But does that mean that the line item that's free cash, which is the source of funding right now for this year's appropriation, it's not a comparable to prior years? Because the prior years we were going to get circuit breaker, that's not in the numbers, whereas this year that's already accounted for above the line.
So we haven't projected out free cash yet. And when we were projecting free cash, we always assumed we would get in about $1 million from circuit breaker. And going forward, starting with fiscal year 27, that we shouldn't expect that anymore, but our expenses have been reduced by that $1 million.
Okay, so that's why the school expenses look so flat versus the
Exactly.
5%
They're
that
not.
we're
It's
expecting.
artificially.
It's not.
So one
Okay,
of the
so
things,
that 3 million that's on free cash is actually a real 3 million draw on free cash versus the prior year, that 3 point whatever 5 million was not a real number, because the reality is we still were going to get the circuit breaker, so it was more like a 2.5 or 2 million.
no, it already reflected what we got back. And it's just what we were using. And again, that is an estimate of what we're going to be able to use this year. We need to look at where we think free cash is coming in and make sure that we can use that 3 million, because some of free cash has to be set aside for, you're supposed to keep 15% of your operating budget as unrestricted free cash. Those are just best practices. And that is our financial policy to do that.
Yeah.
So
No,
we
I
need
mean,
to look. So we need to look and see. There are a lot of estimates in this budget still. So we're assuming we're going to be able to use that.
yeah.
We may not be able to. Now, the other thing I talked to Dawn about was a couple of things. So we always had a handshake with the schools that we would fund the out of district 100%, and excess circuit breaker would come back to the town. And that was just a handshake. And we did that because we were always concerned that maybe circuit breaker would come in less than it was the previous year and we wouldn't be able to do it.
Yep.
So I asked Dawn how she was going to deal with that. Because at first, what I wanted to do was take the amount and still fund it, but just put it in a Dover account. And both she and Molly and Chris and everybody laughed at me and said, you can't have a fictitious account on your books. So what Dawn is planning to do is she is going to keep, because you're allowed to do she's going to keep approximately $500,000 in Dover's circuit breaker account at the region as a buffer for if we don't get 100% funding.
Okay.
And that's what other towns do. Because you're allowed to keep up to 1 year of circuit breaker funds in your circuit breaker fund account. And I said to her that I was somewhat uncomfortable with this because it was new, and was there a way that we could have full transparency on what was in Dover's circuit breaker account at the region so we could understand the ins and outs? And she said, yep, it gets looked at by the state annually. And I believe she told me they could provide it to us on a quarterly basis because they do a reconciliation. So I just thought that would be a good thing for us to be able to see as we were getting comfortable with this.
Now, this might be a question for Dawn, but do
Most
you,
likely, Marty, because I'm not even sure if I correctly told you what she told me.
well, it made a lot more sense than a lot of things Dawn has told me, but the the source of that funding for the circuit breaker, is the federal government involved at all? Does
No,
that
it's the millionaire's tax in Massachusetts is funding it.
okay. And there's no discretion on the part of the state if they have trouble somewhere else to redirect.
I believe the governor has said that that's what the use of this would be, but I'm sure there is discretion. But right now, because I asked on this weekly, right now the state is not talking about cutting any of the school funding.
Yeah. But
They're actually expecting some increases in some of the state aid that they're receiving.
but because of that contingency, this really is a receivable that we're talking about, right?
Right, we get a quarterly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the state funds us quarterly.
And there's some discretion on the part of the state of whether they're going to
Well, I
send
think
it or
they
not.
set it during the budget, and once it's set, I'm sure if there's a budget, I don't know, Mike, maybe I don't think that the state has ever revoked it in the middle of a budget cycle.
Not to the best of my knowledge. I mean,
Right.
Mark, to your point, I think anything could be on the table,
Right.
but I think they've been pretty consistent and committed to it.
Right.
So,
During the financial crash, I remember one year it was funded at, I think, 50% and not 70%.
Mm.
so is the takeaway that we should have when you talk about orange, yellow flashing lights
Hey,
is
this is your analogy, Gavin. I liked it.
yeah, but you're using the analogy, so I just want to make sure is for us to ask very hard questions when we start
Right.
having the departmental reviews.
Right.
Now I'm presuming you guys have already pushed at least a certain level, but the messaging I'm hearing, I just want to make sure I'm hearing the right messaging is really look and push hard because the
Right.
reality is we do have a hole and we do have to close it somehow. And so that's just in general in the operating budget, but also ask a lot of questions with regard to the additional requests because the odds are we're not going to be able to fund all the additional requests.
Correct.
And maybe we can't fund any of them, or we're going to have to prioritize or do some sort of selection within that because the numbers are going to be really hard to close the gap otherwise.
Right. And Mike and Chris have already been communicating that, and yeah,
Mhm.
it's it's not where we want to be. We're not the only town that's here. Believe it or not, we're in I think a lot of towns envy our position. Brookline's looking at a $15 million override. Um, and it's all the inequity between property, the tax levy going up 2.5%, and everybody's expenses just going up much higher than that.
Okay.
Just
What
one.
do you
I
think?
was going to say, do we actually get a spreadsheet where it's like, okay, I'll take, two dump trucks and a gas bill and this and that gets us that lines out the 3.5 million over, or like, you can just swap things around.
So we'll give you the spreadsheet with the budgets. We do have I we do have the preliminary capital spreadsheet too, but all the buckets are going to be moving. So we're going to give you the spreadsheet so you can acclimate yourself to where the numbers are. Chris is going to be the keeper of it. He will move things. I think what we could do, Chris, is maybe a weekly update
Yeah, I mean, I think
And
our
we'll
plan
just
is
tell you what
to,
changed.
yeah, I mean, we'll have some sort of kind of change log,
Right.
in terms of, everyone's talking about the trading horses when things get adjusted and things get moved around. We'll try to make some notes, primarily on the master revenue and expenses. And if that means showing some detail as to the logic as to why something was reduced or moved or called out or removed, we'll be sure to do that. So it'll become apparent as to how things are shifting as we move along. Because a lot of this information does end up coming in along the way here.
Right. But it gets really messy. There's a lot of version control if you don't just have one keeper.
Right. And then also, you should note that I guess when it comes to policy decisions, shifting money around, and us proposing those shifts, that's something that will be discussed here, right? That's
Right.
that's kind of what our purpose is here, is to try to represent everybody and say these are the choices that we want to make for this budget, that go beyond what the staff can choose to do.
Right. But
Ultimately,
can I just emphasize, though, in terms of what Kevin just said, that our job is not to make the budget.
right.
Our job is to understand the budget and then make a recommendation to town residents at town meeting whether or not to approve the different articles. So Robin, Chris, Michael, and the department heads are making the budget. We interact with the department heads, the committee chairs, in order to understand what they're doing and to ground our judgment, our recommendations in our best understanding of what they've come up with. But we're not actually making the budget ourselves. Our job is to take what they give us and then decide whether we can recommend it or not to town meeting.
Right. And I think to Gavin's point, yeah, we need to understand it's going to help us all make the right decision to understand why things are being asked for, you know, and also understanding if we can't give it to you this year, how's it going to impact you? And can you wait? And are there other ways you can get creative with closing these gaps?
All right, great. I want to make sure Chris gets to his late night feeding. So
I mean, he has to have his nap before his late night
yeah.
feed.
I was assuming he would take a nap soon. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn after thanking Michael and Chris and Robin for their presentation.
Yeah, I would like to echo Mike's comments and really thank Chris. He was a trooper. He had family taking care of Colin and he put the budget together. So thank you, Chris.
Thank
Well,
you.
it's my pleasure, and I just wanted to say thanks for everybody's patience as well, as I had some personal timing with what I had going on. So, but looking forward to being back and working with each and every one of you as we go forward.
Great.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, Chris.
I joked at the selectmen's meeting, as a true director of finance, he had the baby on the last day of the calendar year, so he had full tax credit.
Just how I drew
he's
it
good
up.
at his job.
Nice work.
I think his wife gets credit for that. Okay, motion to adjourn
So moved.
and a second.
Second.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Nina,
Yes.
Mish, Marty,
Yes.
Gavin,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Sarah,
Aye.
and Kevin.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Great. So we will have a meeting next week. I'll send out the agenda probably tomorrow. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Hello.
much.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck with the snow.
Take care, bye.